There you go.
All right. All right. So you've done all the mock drafts, and I think the overarching question I want to ask you, because this is the conversation I've had probably the most with people, is what percentage chance, Larry, are you putting that the 49ers are drafting an offensive lineman with the 31st pick in the draft, or with the 27th pick or the 19th pick, or like at this point, how much attention should we be giving to non-offensive linemen in the first round?
I think a lot, just because kind of the way the board, comes off the way it looks like right now, it looks like there's a very good chance that, that you may be looking at like the 7th or the 8th best offensive tackle by the time they pick. And and to me that the value may not be there. And it all kind of is dependent on who they like and who they like as far as how the board shakes out. So like the blue chip guys, Joe Alt from Notre Dame, he'll be gone. Fashanu from Penn State, he'll be gone. Fuaga and J.C. Latham from Alabama, those guys will be gone. And maybe even Fatanu from Washington, I think he'll be gone. Maybe even Graham Barton. So they're going to be looking at, Tyler Guyton and some of these other guys. And I kind of like some of the guys further down the board even more when you factor in some of the D linemen that they may be staring at the end of round one.
As somebody who's been pro offensive lineman in this first round, and I've been talking about it for about a week and a half, it is, and I think the Niners are in a good spot in a sense just to get general talent picking at 31, because I did the math yesterday. I think 16 of the top 32 picks are going to be either quarterback, receiver, or tackle. Now, Albert Breer wrote he thinks there could be 7 tackles that go in the top 20. And if that's the case, it pushes a lot of other talent down to the 49ers. Not ideal if you want to tackle, right? And that's why you see a lot of these guys who are college, maybe tackles, but project to be inside interior offensive linemen being mocked to the 49ers, which is fine, Larry. I'd be fine with them taking a guard. Like, they got to protect the middle against Brock, too. Chris Jones plays in the middle. I don't know what team he's going to be on, but L'Jarius Sneed just got tagged today, and the report is now they're turning their attention to signing Chris Jones. The Niners play 6 of PFF's top 10 rated interior pass rushers next year on their schedule. So I'm fine. Like, I'm the positional value of the interior line I'm fine with, but the case definitely can be made. I think this is part of what you're making, and a lot of people have been reacting to some of the videos I've made in the last week and a half with this, which is you can scheme around your offensive line. The Niners just did it. They can do it again. The defensive line talent is the one that's harder to come by, and that's where they should use this pick. So, when you think about 16 of the 32, if that's going to be the number, then maybe it does leave defensive line talent. But I think like Jonah Ellis is a guy I know. I watched one of your mock drafts video you like. He's not a first round guy. Like, you can get him later. How much later can you get him at the end of the 3rd round? We'll see. He's a guy I really like also out of Utah. He's kind of, to me, he's like Utah's had this with the Bartons. Cody Barton, the guy that injured Trey Lance, is one of 3 NFL Bartons.
Right.
The Ellises are, I think there's 3 if you count one of the brothers and the dad, Luther Ellis.
Christian.
Ellis, yeah, Christian was the Falcon and the Saint, right? He had a couple other brothers that played college football.
Eagles cut him, right? And the Eagles cut him after the Niners burned him in with the Debo tunnel screen in that game earlier this year. He got cut the next day.
I think they the feeling is, this was the other thing, I think Breer said that, or Jim Nagy said this, that the draft is going to kind of really fall off the map in the 4th round and beyond. It's not a deep draft. There's not many underclassmen in this draft. But in the first 3, but here's what I would say about John Lynch and defensive linemen. They don't, especially, are you talking any defensive lineman or interior defensive lineman? You're talking, Jonah Ellis.
Well, they have 6 free agents. They have 6 free agents, and I think their D line to me was the most disappointing part of their team last year when you looked at who they had and what they got out of those guys. So I think they're, I think there's a very good chance the 49ers look at their team this year and say, you know what? We don't need Randy Gregory. We don't need Chase Young. We don't need Kevin Givens. We don't need Sebastian Joseph Day. Beal, question mark. Drake Jackson, question mark. Kalia Davis, very much a question mark. Is Kinlaw coming back? Is Cleveland Farrell coming back? Those would be the two guys I would probably try to bring back. Neither is awesome or coming off an incredible year. So I think they're wide open. I think this is the year where they kind of restructure their D line with a bunch of new faces and also cheaply. And I think they could go heavy D line in this draft.
Who do you like?
I like a lot of guys. I like Darius Robinson, the edge rusher from Missouri, who's was a practice player of the week in Mobile. He's a defensive end, but he's 290 pounds. And he looks like the kind of guy that you could probably have lose 8 or 10 pounds and he could be a 4-3 defensive end at 280, but with speed. He reminds me a lot of kind of maybe a slightly bigger version of Aldon Smith, not quite the athlete, but and then I love a lot of those interior guys. I like Rook Aurora, but Chris Jenkins from Michigan, Michael Hall Jr. from Ohio State, I think had a 27% pass rush win rate, which was like second in the nation this year. So, a couple of those guys definitely come to mind. And those guys, Jenkins is 285, Hall's 280. They're in that, they're great movement guys, but they could play, they could play inside, they could play outside, depending on the line. And then there's the big boys inside too, like McKinley Jackson, who they met with in Indy. I love McKinley Jackson. I'm an A&M fan. He's monster. He was a star in high school. They were talking about the NFL when this kid was in high school in Mississippi. A&M recruited him. He came in. He was awesome. He was their leader. He was their sack guy inside. So I like him quite a bit. And then there's Tavondre Sweat from Texas and Murphy from Texas, the two guys from Texas. Sweat's like 350 pounds and immovable. And, they haven't replaced DJ Jones. So he could be that one technique guy. So there's options on the D line, but to me, a lot of them are going to be sitting on the board. The sweet spot is right where the Niners pick. So I think you might be able to get any number of those guys right there.
I thought it was interesting to hear John Lynch talk yesterday about somebody asked him about Alabama and Nick Saban.
Yeah.
Did you catch that?
Very odd.
And
yeah.
It was odd. And I don't know, but I thought it was interesting because, when you watch like Howie Roseman and the Eagles draft, you look at their draft and it's just like 7 Georgia guys, or at least that's how it feels sometimes. Right.
Yeah.
And the Niners haven't necessarily drafted that way, although, the Niners and Eagles, I think, kind of like the same type of guy, the same personality type of guy. And I thought it was interesting that he talked about Saban and just kind of the competitiveness, the knowledge for the game that you get if you were to draft a guy at Alabama. You also get premium prospects, right? Like Michigan has whatever it is, 18 guys at the combine, premium prospects, Texas premium prospects. I only think, you're only going to get more premium prospects from these bigger schools because guys are going to be transferring for the NIL money after their freshman or sophomore years. If they weren't a premium prospect to start, eventually they end up as one because they go to, a football powerhouse. It just made me wonder listening to him, if that's going to be, Jair Brown came from a tough nose program last year and seemed to match it. When you watched him play at Penn State, like he was pretty representative. Jonah Ellis, Utah's not Michigan, but that program has a identity, and it just hearing that answer. Now he just answered a question he got asked, but it made me think about what the Niners identity is. The 49ers as an organization, you would say, are at the top of the list right now in the NFL of organizational identities. And some of these big time programs have very clear identities, and it just made me wonder how much they put stock in that sort of thing when they're evaluating these guys.
The only thing I'll say is it's very risky because to take all these Bama or Georgia guys, because just because you're getting the best athlete doesn't mean you're getting the best player. Like Robert Beal Jr. at 6'4", 255 probably is one of the best athletes at defensive end that in last year's draft. He ran sub 4.5, but he was hurt all through camp, didn't make an impact till later in the year. Then when he did, it wasn't significant. Like one of the most blue chip players in this draft that a lot of people will be like, oh, the Niners got to take Amarius Mims, the big Georgia tackle. He's 6'7", he's 330. He kind of looks like Broderick Jones, who the Steelers took in the first round last year, but he's played 8 games. He's had 8 starts. So, I think since the Niners have had, it wasn't that long ago, they had that year where they had like 22 guys on IR. You got to figure out who plays the games, not just who's got the talent, the high end talent, but who actually plays. And make sure, to me, if you want to find out, if you want to avoid injuries and guys who miss a lot of games, then draft guys who played a lot in college, guys who didn't miss starts. Value that. That's the way I would look at it. I'll tell you one thing too. If you're the 49ers, if you're really looking to rebuild the right side of your offensive line, 2 guys that I would definitely take a look at in this draft are the South Dakota State tandem, where you have Garrett Greenfield played right tackle at South Dakota State, and then you had Mason McCormick play right guard at South Dakota State. These guys, already get along great and, have a great
You're
chemistry.
saying take both of them?
I like both of them. In fact, the more I look at it, the more I did the research on these guys are really close too. So it's like, if you want a productive, right side of your offensive line in a year or two, Greenfield and McCormick might be, it sounds like a law firm. But Greenfield and McCormick might be your tandem, and you might be able to get both of them, after the 3rd round. So, I might be interested in that if I could get both those guys. McCormick's a brawler, and Greenfield is pretty close to it.
And that's a blue collar. I mean, that's a program with an identity too, right? Historically,
they just had Tucker Kraft go to the Packers last year.
That's right. So you think it sounds like you think the Niners are staying put at 31?
Not necessarily, but I think the value is in more bites of the apple. So I think I think they're going to play it where they're going to. If you ask me how will they play their hand of cards, they will hold on draft day right to their pick to see if the tackle that they want falls to them. And then if the tackle that they don't want, if the tackle that they want doesn't fall to them, I could see them trading back 4 or 5 or 10 picks and getting more draft capital. People say, well, how many rookies do they need? It's not about that. It's about how many bites of the apple and how many rookies can you, if you can draft a dozen rookies, you know what? You can keep your roster really cheap. You can keep your roster really flexible. So, and I kind of agree with that assessment that there's going to be really good players in the 3rd and 4th round. So if you can move down in round 1 and get a couple extra picks in the 4th round, that might be like, the 4th round pick might be the same guy that you get in the 2nd round.